get everybody on the record. Okay, so good morning. This is the videographer. My name is Linda Costello, here on behalf of Depo International. Today is Monday, October 8th, 2018, and the time is 8:59 a.m. We are at 2200 University Avenue in Crookston, Minnesota, to take the video deposition of Bishop Michael Hoeppner in the matter of Doe 457 versus Diocese of Crookston and St. Mary's Mission Church, also known as St. Mary's Mission Church, Red Lake. Will counsel please introduce themselves for the video record?
For plaintiffs, Jeff Anderson.
For the witness, Tom Weiser from St. Paul.
For the defendant, Thomas Braun, B-R-A-U-N.
Also present is Ellen Lindstrom and Trusha Goff.
Okay, will the court reporter please administer the oath?
Please raise your right hand. You solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in this matter shall be the truth, and hold you nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Good morning, Bishop. Would you please state your full name for the record?
Good morning. I am Bishop Michael Hoeppner, Bishop of the Diocese of Crookston.
And give us a spelling of the last name, please.
Capital H-O-E, 2 P's, N-E-R.
We went through a couple of the ground rules pertaining to this deposition first. Should you have any questions about my question, just let me know you don't understand it, and I'll try to clarify it for you.
Thank you.
If at any time you want to take a break, feel free to.
Thank you.
Okay. You were appointed and installed as Bishop of the Diocese of Crookston in the year 2007 by the Holy Father, correct?
Yes.
And how long have you been a priest?
I've been a priest since 1975.
And you were originally ordained in the Diocese of?
Winona, Minnesota.
And did you have official positions appointed to you while a priest of the Diocese of Winona by the then Bishop of Winona?
Yes, I did.
What positions?
Well, I had a number of them. I was an associate pastor. I was a principal of a high school. I was a pastor. I was a judicial vicar. I was the vicar general and moderator of the Curia.
And how long were you vicar general?
I was vicar general, if I recall, for approximately 9 years.
And under what bishop?
Under Bishop Bernard Harrington.
And how long were you principal of the high school?
I was a principal of the high school for about 5 years.
At any time while you were a priest of the Diocese of Winona or in official capacity there, did you receive any actual training in mandatory reporting of suspicions of maltreatment of children or abuse?
Yes, we received training in mandatory reporting about abuse of children, yes.
Who provided that and when?
I don't recall.
Okay. As the Bishop of the Diocese of Crookston, I want to ask you some questions about authorities that are conferred upon you as the ordinary and bishop in Crookston. The priests of the diocese take and make a promise of obedience to you. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you thus have the power to impose restrictions or limitations on any of the faculties of the priest of the Diocese of Crookston. Is that correct?
Could you repeat that?
You as the bishop have the power to impose restrictions on the faculties of any of the priests of the Diocese of Crookston.
We have an ability for oversight for our priests. Any power for restrictions is well, it's regulated. It's not an absolute power for that. It's regulated by canon law.
Subject to canon law, the bishop has the power to appoint a priest, correct?
Correct.
And the bishop has the power to suspend a priest for cause?
In accord with the norm of law.
Yes. And you're talking about the canon law?
Correct.
Okay. And thus the bishop has the power to restrict the priest's faculty in accord with the canon law?
In accord with the Code of Canon Law, yeah.
If you, as a bishop, have suspicions of misconduct by a priest, is there anything that limits you from suspending the faculties of the priest pending an investigation?
Objection vague, calling for a hypothetical.
We have to follow due process as we would investigate that, yeah.
So if you have suspicions of a priest engaging in misconduct or suspicions of sexual abuse, what due process do you have to follow to restrict or limit the priest's access to children?
Objection vague, calling for a hypothetical.
If a credible accusation is received, we have a process calls for investigation. We take these matters very seriously. We calls for an investigation. We have a review board that assists in looking at allegations that we can use. So that would be our process.
You referred to due process, and you have to follow due process. What is due process when it comes to suspicions of sexual abuse by a priest that you as the bishop are required to follow before you can take action?
Objection. I believe the question has been answered, but go ahead, Bishop.
Well, again, we take all these accusations seriously. We would follow civil law. We are mandatory reporters. And so we would contact those people, civil authorities. We would do an investigation into what's coming forward, the allegation, and to see what is there.
So when you refer to due process, before you can act responsive to a suspicion of sexual abuse by an offending cleric, by a cleric of the diocese, what process are you referring to? Are you talking about the civil law, the canon law, or some other process?
I'm talking about all of them. You know, we're required civilly to report credible accusations, and we do that. And we, as a church, initiate an investigation. We have the assistance of our civil attorneys. We have the assistance of a review board. And we take these matters all seriously.
So I just wrote down what you said. You said, quote, you're required to report credible accusations, unquote. How do you determine an accusation is credible in order to determine whether or not it needs to be reported?
Well, I think we consult with our attorney, first of all. And on counsel, we would determine whether this is a reportable, something that we need to report. Reasonable cause to suspect, I think, is another way we look at that. If there's reasonable cause to suspect, we receive a report, we notify the civil authorities, and we consult with our own attorney, and that's kind of the process.
When you say consult with your own attorney, who are you referring to?
Well, right now, Mr. Tom Braun.
And how long have you used him as a consultor when considering whether or not there is a credible allegation of sexual abuse that requires reporting?
For some years now.
How many?
I don't know exactly, 2 or 3, I would guess.
Who before that?
Our diocesan attorney was Mr. Rust here in Crookston.
And how long was he the consultant used for determining whether or not a report was credible so as to be required to report to law enforcement?
He goes back before my time, so
Yeah.
that was...
Before 2007 then?
Correct.
Okay.
That's my understanding of what was done.
So, in response to the question, about when an accusation is deemed to be credible or not, I think you said the first thing you do to see whether or not it needs to be reported is consult with the attorney first. Have you ever received a report of suspicious of sexual abuse that was not reported to law enforcement after having consulted with the attorney first?
Counsel, for time period purposes, could you indicate what time period we're talking about?
Since 2007.
Thank you.
Could you repeat the question?
Sure. You said that you're required to report credible accusations, and for it to determine to be credible, the first thing you do is consult with the attorney. The question is this: since 2007, have you ever not reported information of sexual abuse after having consulted with an attorney?
You used the word first. I described the process that involves these things, and as I understand your question, to my recollection, the answer is no.
So is it your testimony that every suspicion of sexual abuse that came to your attention as the bishop has been reported to law enforcement?
Objection insofar as the question is vague, but go ahead, Bishop.
And unrestricted with respect to time.
Repeat the question, please.
Since you were appointed and installed as bishop in 2007, have you reported to law enforcement every suspicion of sexual abuse reported to you?
It's my understanding that we have reported to the authorities the complaints or accusations that we needed to report.
You understand, as the bishop, you are the head of education in the diocese, correct?
Objection vague.
Catholic education.
As the bishop of a diocese, one of the areas that we foster and seek to instill is Catholic education, yes.
And you appoint the head of the Department of Education for the Diocese of Crookston, do you not?
Yes,
The Catholic schools.
yes.
Who is that?
It has been Tina Stenger, but she recently has taken another job, so we're currently looking for someone for that position. Monsignor Foltz, as moderator of the Curia, is in charge of that.
And is Monsignor Foltz a mandatory reporter under the mandatory reporting laws of the state of Minnesota?
Objection insofar as it calls for a legal conclusion.
I concur.
It is my understanding that he is.
And do you understand that the Director of Education is?
Again, insofar as it calls for a legal conclusion, object on that basis.
It is my understanding that he or she is.
Are you?
It is my understanding that I am.
So, since you were appointed and installed as Bishop of the Diocese of Crookston in 2007, have you reported every suspicion of sexual abuse of a minor received by you to law enforcement?
Objection, asked and answered.
The Vicar General is the one who reports to the mandatory receivers of that. So I personally have not reported, but the diocese has.
Have you delegated the responsibility to report under law to the Vicar General?
Objection vague, calls for a legal conclusion.
Objection as to form.
The process we use is that the Vicar General reports these cases.
Is that a process installed by you or inherited by you when you were installed as a bishop?
Please repeat that.
You say the process is the Vicar General does that. Is that a process established by you or your predecessor?
I would have to check. I don't know, but it is the current process. The Vicar General is the one who reports these for the Diocese of Crookston. It has been that way, and I understand, to my best of my ability, it was that way. I don't know before I came.
So if you understand you to be a mandatory reporter, where is it written in a process or practice that you can delegate that obligation by a process to somebody else?
Objection as to form.
An objection on the basis it calls for a legal conclusion insofar as you're asking this witness to make any opinion about the mandatory reporting law itself.
You can answer.
My answer would be that the diocese reports them all. The Vicar General is the one who reports in cases of accusations of sexual abuse of a minor by a clergy person.
And you made the assertion that the Vicar General is the one that does that and has always done it. Is that your assertion?
To the extent it misstates this witness's testimony, objection.
It is my understanding, yes.
And how many reports has the Vicar General then made of suspicions of sexual abuse to law enforcement as required by Minnesota statute?
Again, over what period of time, Council?
Since all these questions are since you've been bishop in 2007.
Thank you. If you know.
Well, it does not come to my recollection now how many.
What's your best estimate?
It just doesn't come to my recollection how many there were in the last, 11 years. I'd say some.
What priests have been reported according to the process you're referring to by the Vicar General as having engaged in conduct suspicious of sexual abuse as required by law?
I'm going to object insofar as it calls for invasion of the attorney-client privilege. The witnesses talked about the process that involves consultation with legal counsel. Again, to the extent you're able to answer, Bishop, go ahead.
To my recollection, I don't know the number.
You already told me you didn't know the number. The question now is, what priests have been reported as having engaged in conduct triggering a report suspicious of sexual abuse to law enforcement under law?
To the best of my ability, I know there have been some, and we have a list of priests on our webpage, so there are those there. I think there are 6 or 7. Again, Monsignor Foltz is the one that handles this for the Diocese of Crookston.
So, can you identify that there have been any reports made by the Diocese of Crookston while you have been bishop to law enforcement of priests suspected of sexual abuse?
I think this has been asked and answered, but go ahead.
Well, the one that comes to mind, of course, is Dole 457. That's why we're here today, and that would be Father Pat Sullivan.
And when was that report made and by whom?
To the best of my recollection, I'm going back to around 2009. And that report was, that complaint was reported by the Vicar General, Monsignor Baumgartner, to the Red Lake Police and to Child Protection Services. That's the best of my recollection.
All right. And besides Father Sullivan, any other priests, to your knowledge, that have been reported to law enforcement in accord with Minnesota law for suspicion of sexual abuse?
Same objections. Go ahead.
Again, I would refer to the list on our website. That would be my answer there.
Well, the list on the website lists people who have been deemed to have been credibly accused. They do not list the priests who have been necessarily reported for suspicions of sexual abuse, correct?
Repeat that, please.
The priests you refer to on your website are the priests that have been identified by the diocese as having been credibly accused, correct?
That is my understanding, yes.
The question I'm putting before you is identifying, as best you can, Bishop, the names of the priests that have been reported as having engaged in some conduct suspicious of sexual abuse of a minor that would trigger a report to law enforcement, besides Father Sullivan, who you identified.
Since 2007.
Yes.
To the best of my recollection right now, I don't have a name.
Have you yourself ever investigated or attempted to discern whether a report made to you concerning suspicions of sexual abuse was credible or not?
Ken, I'm assuming for your purpose of this question, you're talking about since 2007?
All the questions are since 2007.
Thank you.
To the best of my recollection, no.
So who have you delegated to make the determinations of credibility so as to whether or not a report should be made?
For the Diocese of Crookston, the Vicar General is charged with dealing with accusations of abuse by clerics.
And the Vicar General is currently?
Monsignor Foltz.
And he has been the Vicar General for how long?
3 years going on 4, I believe.
And his predecessor was?
Monsignor Baumgardner.
And Monsignor Baumgartner was appointed by you?
He was.
And what training does Monsignor Foltz as Vicar General have in discernment of whether an accusation of sexual abuse is credible and thus required to report?
Objection insofar as it calls for consultation with legal counsel for the Diocese of Crookston.
That's not. I asked the question is, what's the training? What training does Monsignor Foltz have in determining whether an accusation is credible?
Same objection.
So as to trigger a report to law enforcement.
Again, same objection.
We have an ongoing education and training process in the Diocese of Crookston that I know of, and that talks about and deals with recognizing abuse. We again take these things very seriously, and we work very hard to educate people. In my own experience, I've gone to workshops, I know about this. I don't know Father Foltz's history offhand as to what workshops or so on he may have gone to, but there is an ongoing training that we do.
So my question to you now is specific to Monsignor Foltz. The Monsignor designated by you, appointed by you as the Vicar General, as the person who is to make the discernment of whether or not an accusation is credible. The question pertains to Monsignor Foltz. What training has Monsignor Foltz had?
Objection, asked and answered.
Let me finish it. Yeah, okay. What training has Monsignor Foltz had in discerning the credibility of an accusation of sexual abuse suspicions so as to trigger or not trigger a report to law enforcement?
Objection, asked and answered, calls for legal conclusion.
Join the objection.
I would, as I have stated, we do an ongoing training, and that's been every year since I've been here. In addition to that, I don't know what other training Monsignor Foltz would have had.
So do you have knowledge of whether or not Monsignor Foltz has attended the ongoing training that you're referring to that you all get?
Yes.
Okay. And you're saying that Monsignor Foltz has attended that training?
Yes.
And to your knowledge, has Monsignor Foltz gotten any other training besides the ongoing training that you are referring to here?
To my knowledge, I don't know that.
Okay. So then what training is it that you and all the others have gotten in reporting suspicions of sexual abuse and determining credibility of an accusation?
Objection as to form, calls for legal conclusion.
My answer would be the same, that we have an ongoing program for training in these matters, and that I know Monsignor Foltz has been engaged in every year.
So my question is what training is this? Who does this? How often, and what does it consist of that you're referring to here as this ongoing training that you and Monsignor Foltz and others have received?
Objection, compound question.
This Office of Safe Environment for the Diocese of Crookston conducts this ongoing training, and we've been doing it every year since I've been here.
And who does the training at the Office of Safe Environment that you're referring to?
The director of the office, Mr. Jim Clausen, has been that director. He's just finishing with that office now.
How long has he been director?
Oh, I would think maybe 5 or 6 years. He came shortly after I did, I believe.
Jim Clausen is a priest, isn't he?
No,
He's lay?
correct.
Okay.
He
And,
was hired by Monsignor Baumgartner.
okay. And so what training then has Jim Clausen, as director of this office, actually done?
Every year, he produces and updates an ongoing training. We use the computer in that too. And it's our Safe Environment training program.
Is that classroom training? Is that online training? What training is that you claimed Jim Clausen, as director of the Office of the Safe Environment, provides to you and Monsignor Fultz and others in the diocese?
It's online. It's my understanding there have been speakers coming in also. Over the years, I don't recall any specifically on that.
And the question now is directed not to training in general, but the question is directed specifically to training on the obligations of reporting suspicions of sexual abuse to law enforcement, and what training has been provided in discernment of whether an accusation is credible or not as to the obligation to report.
It's my understanding we have had training in that.
And is that in the online training you're referring to then?
I believe so.
Okay. And who is the individual or individuals that provide that training specific to that issue?
I believe we have had attorneys provide training in that matter, and again, training through the Office of Safe Environment.
What attorneys?
I would refer to our current attorneys or Dan Russ, our former attorneys. That's my understanding anyway.
So are you saying then that Mr. Braun has provided training to you, Monsignor Fultz, and others in what is determined to be a credible accusation of suspicions of sexual abuse so as to trigger a report?
Objection, invades attorney-client privilege.
I would put that when there's a need for determining whether there's credible accusations, our attorneys educate us in that manner.
Well, I'm talking about training now, and consultations with your lawyer in specific cases we can deal with in the specific cases. But now we're talking about training. Training provided according to you and the others in the diocese, including Monsignor Fultz. You've indicated there's a process. Monsignor Fultz is designated to be the person required to report, and if an accusation is credible. The question now then is what training by what attorneys have been provided to help determine when a report is credible so as to require a report to law enforcement?
Do you believe that has been asked and answered?
Calls for a legal conclusion and also misstates his previous testimony.
As I have said, I believe our diocesan attorneys have been involved in helping to educate us on mandatory reporting, and I believe that in our online program, there's also education about reporting, as I've said.
So we're talking now about the attorneys. You say the attorneys have done training. What attorneys do you claim have done training specific to discernment of credibility and the reporting of sexual abuse?
Well, I believe, again, our diocesan attorney has helped us and educated us. I believe the attorneys we have now continue to help us and educate us in this matter.
Are you talking about conversations?
I'm just talking about our work with them and their work with us.
Okay. So the question that I have now is formal training, classroom type training, educational material, or anything that could be determined to be actual training versus a conversation. What attorneys have done training specific to obligations of reporting and discernment of credibility?
Counsel, again, I think that this has been gone over numerous times. I think that this witness has...
I asked about
didn't
training.
finish. You interrupted.
No,
Excuse me.
no, it hasn't. I asked about training. You said the attorneys have done training. I just want to know what attorneys have done what training, to whom and when.
Again, counsel, with all due respect, I do believe that this question has been asked a number of times, and I think that this witness has given a number of responses that have indicated who has provided training, as you've indicated. I don't know that there's any more that to be gained by covering the same ground again. So I will allow Bishop to answer this question one more time, and then I think we need to move on.
It is my understanding that over the years, there has been training in online that our attorneys have worked with us to educate us on these matters.
Have any attorneys done formal training to you or others in the diocese?
Objection vague.
It is my understanding that over the years, attorneys have worked with us in the diocese to provide education on this matter.
What material has been provided by these attorneys to you and the other employees pertaining to mandatory reporting? What written materials?
Again, I referred to the written material. I would refer to the written material in our safe environment training. If you're speaking of written material, other than that.
And what attorneys have provided the training that you claim to have been received? By name, what attorneys?
It is my understanding over the years that our attorneys have provided that.
To whom? And the question was, what attorneys? Name.
Well, I know Mr. Braun has worked with Monsignor Foltz and I. That's my understanding. Other than that, it's my understanding that we have had training on that.
So apart from Mr. Braun providing information to yourself and Monsignor Foltz, has Mr. Braun provided any written materials or training materials to the diocese or members of the diocese, including clergy?
Objection as to form.
Does not, I don't recollect right now.
Okay. And so then any other attorneys provided training that you assert have provided training to you or other members of the diocese besides Mr. Braun?
It is my understanding that education has been provided. That's my understanding.
But the question is other than Mr. Braun, has any attorneys done any training specific to this topic to employees of the diocese?
It's my understanding that we have had that training.
Question, listen to the question. To your knowledge, have any attorneys besides Mr. Braun provided the training specific to this topic to employees of the diocese?
It is my understanding that we have had, through attorneys, education on this matter.
What attorneys besides Mr. Braun?
I don't recollect.
When was that education or training provided, if it was?
I believe I'm referring to before 2007.
Okay. Since 2007, has any been provided?
Again, with the council, with Mr. Braun, he has worked with us to educate us. I don't recall formal classes or any that kind of education taking place.
Any written materials provided?
Through the online, there's those written materials.
What written materials are provided on the online training specific to the obligation of reporting and the discernment of credibility?
Well, we're very thorough in our online training. It's my understanding we each year we take a different component. There's been information on mandatory reporting. There's been information on recognizing abuse, and so it's good training and material that comes out. Material from the national offices are used, and it's presented in a way that's easy for people to follow, I believe.
Have you yourself reviewed the materials pertaining to obligations to report and the discernment of credibility that has been provided online, as you assert?
I have.
When was the last time?
I do it every year.
Okay. And is that in a published format that is provided, or lecture format, or what?
It's online. It's material to read and then to answer questions about afterwards.
Okay. And what then do you understand the training that you received online and that you refer to? What does that say about your obligation and that of the others in this diocese to report?
What does it say about reporting?
Yes.
Well, it says, as my understanding is, when there's a reasonable cause to suspect and an accusation is made, we inform proper authorities.
And what do you understand it says about what constitutes reasonable cause?
Well, there are certain signs of a person being abused. If a person makes an allegation, we inform our attorney, we inform law enforcement, as in the case, for example, of Red Lake, as I mentioned before. We had this accusation, and so we notified the police and we notified Child Protection Services.
Bishop, if you've been provided this training as you claim to have been provided, why do you in the diocese consult with a lawyer before reporting to law enforcement as required by the statute?
Objection as to invasion of attorney-client privilege and to form.
Objection
You can
also,
answer.
excuse me, also objection again insofar as it calls for a legal conclusion.
And a while ago, you used the word "first" in that question.
You said it first. You said we consult with the attorney first. That's what you said, Bishop, so I'm asking you, why do you go to attorney before you report?
Excuse me, just hold on. Again, counsel, objection insofar as it misstates the witness's testimony, but go ahead.
What I would want to say is that we have a process, and I believe I mentioned the word process. It includes various things, notifying the proper authorities, consulting with attorneys, and it involves both of those things. We report as is required. And in the Diocese of Crookston, as I mentioned, the Vicar General is charged with reporting to the enforcement people.
So, when I asked you about this earlier, and you talked about the requirement to report credible accusations, I wrote down and I quoted you, you said we consult with the attorney first of all. Why do you consult with the attorney first of all?
Objection, asked and answered, just states his previous testimony.
Join the objection.
What I would say is, I don't mean first of all in terms of first, second, third, and fourth. I mean, it's a wise thing to consult with our attorney, but we report when and as we are required to report.
Did you report the information you received suspicious of sexual abuse pertaining to Grundhouse when you first received it?
Objection to the extent that any inquiries with regard to Monsignor Grundhouse exceed the matters before the witness with regard to the deposition that was noticed.
I concur in that objection.
Again, Monsignor Foltz would have been the one to report that.
Question, just listen to the question. Did you, Bishop, report the information that you received specific to Grundhouse, suspicious of sexual abuse, to law enforcement?
Excuse me.
This is outside the scope of the 457 case, not materially relevant to any fact in this case.
I would join the objection that this is not reasonably calculated to lead to the discovery of admissible evidence with regard to the case Doe 57 versus Diocese of Crookston. Let's take a break.
We are going off the record at 9:49 a.m. Okay, we are back on the record at 10:56 a.m.
Okay, counsel, do you want to go ahead and state what the position is here?
So we've discussed issues related to the Bassett case and Bishop, and our position is that those facts are not relevant to this litigation, and that there'll be another deposition noticed in the versus Diocese of Crookston case to deal with those questions of the Bishop at a later date and time.
All right. And we've obviously had some significant discussions about this, and while we don't agree, what we have agreed is that we'll then proceed with just with the 457 case for today, and that you'll produce probably the Bishop and probably Monsignor Fultz at our offices at a later date.
At a later date, yeah.
So what we're going to do is go ahead with part of what we had planned, but not all of it, and then we'll just defer the questions that had intended to be asked pertaining to Vasek and go then to the 457 case and ask some questions pertaining to that.
Thank you.
We're doing it under a protective order. I see no reason not to use the names.
I agree.
Okay. We're going to use the names of people that are possible survivors and the name of the plaintiff just because it's easier than using names. So,
Okay.
when is the first time you received any information of any suspicion of any unfitness by Father Patrick Sullivan to be in a ministry in one of the parishes of the diocese?
Could you repeat that, please?
When is the first time you received any information from any source that suggested that there were questions about Patrick Sullivan's fitness to be in ministry?
I came to the diocese in 2007. My recollection is that in 2008 there was a concern about his behavior. That would be 2008.
And what was expressed that caused that concern?
Well, to the best of my recollection, the diocese received concern that someone had been sexually abused. That was reported to the police at Red Lake and the Child Services. We take all these things seriously, and it was looked into, and to the best of my recollection, there was nothing found to substantiate the claim.
So I think, Bishop, as I made notes of your response to the question, I broke it my notes into 3 sections, so I'm going to break down my questions into each of those sections. So responsive to the question that I asked about when was there first a concern raised about Sullivan's fitness to minister in the diocese, I think your answer was the first concern was 2008 about his behavior. Is that correct?
Fitness to minister in the diocese?
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
Well, when you place a priest in a parish, you make a determination as the bishop that that priest is fit to minister in the parish, correct?
We make every effort, yes, we make every effort to make sure that priests are ready for ministry. And when I came to the Diocese of Crookston, Father Pat was in ministry and continued to do so.
So then, when you came to the diocese in 2007, it was about a year before you received any information that either hinted or raised concerns about his fitness to minister. Is that your testimony?
To the best of my recollection, yes.
When you came to the diocese and were first appointed and then installed in 2007, at that time, given your experience in Winona and all the issues that have arisen in the diocese concerning sexual molestation, did you make an effort to review the files of any of the priests who are now in your charge as the bishop?
For the record, with regard to your precatory comments, assumes facts not in evidence. It's also vague. So if you just focus on the specific question as opposed to the precatory comments.
To the best of my recollection, for example, with Father Sullivan, I did review that file when this concern came in. To the best of my knowledge, I did. Again, we had a kind of an investigation and was not found to be substantiation for the claims that were brought forward. That's the best of my recollection.
When you reviewed the file of Father Sullivan, that was after the concern about his fitness to minister came in, correct?
To the best of my recollection.
And with whom did you review that file, if anybody else?
I remember reviewing it myself. I don't remember. I would probably have reviewed, would have talked the matter over with the Vicar General at that time, who was Monsignor Baumgartner.
Did he look at the file with you or not?
I don't remember specifically.
When you think back on the review of the file of Father Sullivan responsive to the concern raised, the concern now being somebody may have been sexually abused, correct?
Correct.
Okay. When you looked at that file, after the concern was raised that you have expressed, did you see anything in the file that made you more concerned than you already had?
To the best of my recollection, I looked at the file vis-a-vis the current concern, and I don't, again, to the best of my recollection, the concern was not, was the main focus of my looking through the record, and I don't recall finding anything that would alarm me to that matter more.
Did you see any treatment records in there?
This was in 2008 or 9. I remember Father went off to Downingtown after he finished a year, and that was after that, I believe.
So my question is, when you reviewed this file responsive to the concern in 2008 of possible sexual abuse by Father Sullivan, the question is, did you see anything in the file on your initial review of it that raised any additional concerns about his fitness to minister and his safety pertaining to kids?
Not to my recollection.
So did the file, based on your experience, appear to then be clean of any indicators of sexual abuse?
Objection vague.
That's my recollection.
What do you remember about the contents of the file you reviewed pertinent to Sullivan?
Well, I remember that ministering at Red Lake seemed to be a difficult assignment. And Father Pat had been there a number of years. A term is 6 years, and it was in his second term. When I'm reviewing this file, it seems to me, if I remember correctly, there was an investigation or a look at this, and Father Pat continued in ministry. He was in his second term when I came, so I don't remember anything that would really preclude him from continuing in ministry.
I might have misunderstood or not fully understood what you just said to me. You said there was a second look at? What were you referring to there? I didn't understand.
No, I don't know a second look at.
So just thinking about the point in time in which you now are looking at Sullivan's file, what is in the file that you remember reviewing at that time, the first time you looked at that file, responsive to the concern raised about someone having been sexually abused, perhaps by him?
The best of my recollection is that the file talked about Father Pat. It was slow to make decisions. And then this accusation came, and it was looked at, and there was no substantiation found for it. To the best of my recollection, it was really unclear who the accusation referred to.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, Bishop, then the file that you're reviewing pertinent to Sullivan now contains details of the allegation that gave rise to the concern. Is that correct? In other words,
The file, to the best of my recollection, the file had covered a period of his being at Red Lake. In 2008, an allegation is made, and it's looked into, and that's my recollection.
who looked into it according to the file?
I don't remember.
Okay. And did the file reflect, as you reviewed it, that this allegation had been reported to a Red Lake and a Child Protection Services?
Well, the best of my recollection is when the allegation was received, it was reported, yes.
By whom?
It was reported by Monsignor Baumgartner, to my recollection.
I'm looking at the files that I do have, and there is accusation having been made by a youth or a minor at the time pertaining to Red Lake. The year appears to us to be 2009. Is it possible that it's 2009 instead of 2008?
Counsel, what document are you referring to?
Well, I've got the memo of Father Baumgartner of September 15, 2009. Father Jerry Rogers talked to me in person. He received 3 phone calls from a 17-year-old young man who identified himself as blank. And he's stating that it's September of 2009.
Yeah, you're going to mark that as an exhibit and have the witness refer to it?
Yeah, let's do that, just so we don't get screwed up on dates here. I'm showing you what we've marked for identification as Exhibit 11. Oh, and there's, let me take that back from you, and I'm going to give copies to council here. I'll hand that one to you and to council.
Thank you.
And Bishop, this is one of the exhibits produced in this litigation. It's a memo, which is 3 pages. At the 3rd page is from Monsignor Baumgartner, Vicar General, dated September 21, 2009. Do you see that?
Mm-hmm. Is that a yes?
Yes, yes.
And so, do you think then, if you look at this memo, does it refresh your recollection that the year that the concern was first raised would have been 2009, not 2008?
I see that this says September 15, 2009, but Father Jerry Rogers was the first to hear of this.
Okay.
And I don't know what date that would have been.
Okay. Why don't we just find out then how you learned Father Rogers heard of this, and let's just work back forward from that.
As this indicates, Father Baumgartner dealt with this issue, and it's my understanding that it went from Father Jerry Rogers to Father Baumgartner and then to me.
On the same day, or the same week, the same month? What was the timing of that?
I don't recall.
What do you recall about the source of you first hearing of the allegation? who brought it to you?
I believe it was Monsignor Baumgartner.
And he was then your Vicar General.
Correct.
And what did he say to you?
I don't remember exactly, but that there was an accusation, a concern coming from Red Lake.
And is this the first time you had received an accusation of sexual abuse of a minor while a bishop in Crookston?
I don't recall.
And what did Monsignor Baumgartner say beyond that there had been an accusation at Red Lake? Did he identify it was sexual abuse of a minor?
I don't recall. As your memo says, that he had received a phone call from someone 17 years old, it says, so...
Well, I can look at the memo, but I want to know what you remember. So what do you remember?
I don't remember specifically what he said, no.
Okay, so let me just get the answer here clearly to the question that I asked. And that is, what do you remember Monsignor Baumgartner, your Vicar General, first saying to you about the accusation that was made?
What I remember is it's simply that there's been one made.
And when he said that to you, what did you say in response?
I don't remember. I would normally, and as it indicates, I would say, investigate this.
And is there, or was there then a protocol established by you as the bishop for the investigation of an allegation of sexual abuse of a minor?
Yes.
What was the
We were
protocol?
following the Charter for the Protection of Children
Okay.
and its norms.
And so, do you remember what you felt when Monsignor Baumgartner brought this to you?
No, I don't remember.
Did you know Patrick Sullivan at the time that Baumgartner had brought this to you?
Yes.
How had you come to know him?
He's a priest of the Diocese of Crookston, and I came to know all the priests as I became their bishop and got to know them.
Okay. Had you met with him at the parish or visited him at the parish? He had more than one, but at St. Mary's in Red Lake or any other place where he had been assigned?
I suspect that I met him at various places.
Do you remember?
Specifically, no.
Okay. Do you remember ever having heard before Baumgartner brought this allegation to you that there was anything unusual about Sullivan or anything that sticks in your mind?
Not to my recollection.
And so after Baumgartner told you this, do you remember feeling alarmed? Do you remember feeling skeptical? Do you remember what you were feeling when you heard that one of the priests had been now the subject of an allegation of childhood sexual abuse?
Objection asked and answered.
And compound question.
No.
What is the next thing you did or said to anybody pertinent to this matter then? This allegation?
As to my recollection, I was speaking with Father Baumgartner and would ask him to investigate and to look into this. We take all these seriously and they need to be looked into, and that's what I'm sure I did.
Okay. And do you remember what words you said to Baumgartner about instructions he should follow?
No.
Okay. And what did you then do next responsive to this? Or what information did you receive from any source pertaining to your instruction to Baumgartner?
I don't recall. I'm sure I would wait for what he would find as he looked into it.
So is your answer you don't recall what happened next responsive to this?
I don't recall immediately what happened next, other than I would indicate that he should look into the matter.
So what did happen next then?
As my understanding is, Father Baumgartner looked into the matter.
And what did you hear or learn, or what role did you have in that?
Well, the Vicar General is responsible for investigating these things, and my understanding is that was investigated and there was nothing to substantiate this claim.
How did you learn that there was nothing to substantiate?
That would have been the report from Father Baumgartner.
Was that a report in writing or a verbal report or what?
I don't remember.
And you do remember there was nothing to substantiate the claim.
That's
What do you remember about the claim, the substance of the claim itself?
I don't remember a lot about the substance. I don't remember a lot about the substance. There was a claim. It was looked into. And my recollection is there was nothing to substantiate the claim.
And you say Monsignor Baumgartner was the one looking into it. Was anybody else deployed to look into this?
I don't recall.
Did you, as the bishop, make a decision not to bring in a professional investigator?
I don't remember that.
Did you, at the time that Monsignor Baumgartner had brought this to you, had he reported it?
Excuse me?
At the time that Monsignor Baumgartner brought this to you, had he reported it to civil authorities?
I don't know the answer to the timing there. I know it was reported to the authorities.
The question that I have is at the time that you first learned from Baumgartner that an accusation of child sexual abuse had been made against Father Sullivan, had it been reported to civil authorities?
I don't remember the timing of that, but the diocese did report it. And again, the Vicar General is the one to report this for the diocese, and it was reported as required.
So, at the time that Baumgartner brought this to you, do you know what the Charter for Protection of Children required you as the bishop to do to follow protocol?
And the matter of reporting was being dealt with. The diocese is reporting as required this accusation, this complaint. Monsignor Baumgartner is the one reporting it.
Okay. And it's your testimony that you don't remember if he had reported it at the time he brought it to you, or he had not reported it at the time he brought it to you?
I don't remember.
Do you remember saying to him, report it?
I don't remember saying it, but again, the issue needs to be reported, and therefore I'm working with Father Baumgartner, and he's doing what's necessary to make sure it is reported.
How long after he brought that to you did you learn that it had not been substantiated?
I don't remember.
Who investigated it to make the determination and report to you that it was not a substantiated allegation?
What I remember is Monsignor Baumgartner is the one I worked with in this matter.
And to your knowledge, did anybody else do investigation that led to the determination that it was not substantiated?
I don't recall.
How long after the initial report to you by Baumgartner did you learn that it was a not substantiated allegation?
I don't remember how long that was.
Was it days, weeks, months? What's your best estimate?
No, I don't remember. The report was made, and the report was it's not substantiated, to the best of my recollection.
And who reported to you that the allegation was not substantiated?
To the best of my recollection, Monsignor Baumgartner.
And to your knowledge, as you sit here today, was anybody else involved in making that determination that it was not substantiated?
I don't recall sitting here today.
So just in terms of timeline, Baumgartner reports to you that there is an allegation. He comes back and reports to you, and how much later that is, you don't recall, but that the allegation is not substantiated, correct?
Correct.
What's the next thing you did or heard responsive to allegations against Sullivan?
I do not recall that.
Did you or anybody under your direction send Father Sullivan to an evaluation?
Yes, my recollection is that as his term finished, he was sent to Downingtown, Pennsylvania. Yes.
Why?
Well, to the best of my recollection, there was concern that he had finished a difficult assignment. He needed some rest. Maybe a concern that he was depressed. I know he was slow in dealing with things, but it had been a difficult assignment for him.
And when you made the determination to send him to, you called it Downingtown, Pennsylvania. Is that also known as St. John Vianney?
Yes.
When you made the determination to send him there, for the reasons you've specified here today, was that before or after the allegation of childhood sexual abuse had been made against him and reported to you by Baumgartner?
I believe that's after.
How long after that allegation was reported to you by Baumgartner did you make the determination to send him to St. John Vianney for evaluation?
I don't recall that. I don't remember.
And who brought you the information that caused you to send Sullivan to St. John Vianney for evaluation?
Well, I think, again, he was finishing an assignment.
Now, just remember the question. Who brought you the information, Bishop, that caused you to make the decision to send him to evaluation? The question is who?
I don't recall. I think he's finishing an assignment. He's going to move on. I think it's good, given his assignment, as I've come to know him, that this would be good for him. And so we made arrangements for him to go there.
Had you, as a bishop or formerly as a vicar general in Winona, ever sent a priest to St. John Vianney for evaluation?
Objection. Before you answer, Bishop, I think you can confine your answer to your role as the bishop for the Diocese of Crookston, and don't provide any testimony with regard to your work as the Vicar General in the Diocese of Winona.
Right. In my work as the Bishop of Crookston, yes. To Downington, I don't believe so. But
that was the question.
That was the question, yes.
How familiar were you with Downington, and why did you choose Downington to send Sullivan to?
I was somewhat familiar with Downington as one of the places that would be good for a priest to go for what I wanted Father Pat to have. There were various places in the country, and that was one of them that came to mind.
It's also one of the places that ordinaries and superiors send priests who have been accused of sexual abuse, is it not?
If you know.
My understanding is it is.
And were you aware that it was founded by the Archdiocese and then Cardinal Archbishop in Philadelphia, one of the purposes of which was to evaluate priests with sexual disorders and problems?
If you know. I do know, and yes, as is St. Luke's, for example, and Southdown in Canada. So yes, I know that.
Did you, at the time the decision was made to send Sullivan there, know that there were concerns about his sexuality and expression of that, and boundaries relating to it?
Objection, vague.
When I sent him there, I certainly knew of the issue that we talked about regarding Red Lake, sure.
So that was in your mind?
I knew of that issue. I also have come to know Father Pat, and again, a concern for his health and his well-being all around. I thought it would be good, and the diocese thought it would be good that my recollection is for some rest for him, and an evaluation certainly wouldn't hurt. And my recollection is, at the end of his stay, there was nothing that precluded him returning to ministry.
At the time that you sent him to what you call Downington, we referred to as St. John Vianney, or any time before you sent him there, did you ask Father Pat if he had sexually abused the youth that had made the accusation, or any other youth, while working as a priest of the diocese?
I don't remember.
Did you make any notes of any of the meetings pertaining to him when Baumgartner came to you, or when you met with Sullivan?
I don't remember.
That's a serious allegation. Why wouldn't you why wouldn't you remember asking the priest if you asked him if he had committed the offense?
Sorry. Objection argumentative.
Objection is the floor.
The Vicar General is the one who investigates this.
The Vicar General is the one that is delegated with the charge of investigating it. You're the one that's delegated with the responsibility of making sure the priests are fit and safe in ministry, correct?
Objection argumentative.
Yes.
Why didn't you ask Sullivan then if he'd abused any kids?
Objection misstates the witness's testimony.
Grant objection.
I don't recall, but I don't recall specifically talking to Father Sullivan about this myself.
Did you not want to know?
It's not that, no.
What is it?
It's just I don't recall talking to him about it.
So, you did say that he was sent there, and you did get authorization from him to get a report of their findings, did you not?
I believe so, yes.
And the diocese and you as the bishop agreed to pay them for their both evaluation and any treatment required, correct?
I believe so, yes.
And he gave you full authorizations to get and have his medical information released to you to see if in fact he was fit to minister, correct?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. Let's get Exhibit 9. I'm showing you what we've marked Exhibit 9. Bishop, I'm going to take 11 back from you for a moment. And you recognize Exhibit 9 as the report of the psychological assessment done of Father Sullivan by St. John Vianney Center?
I would accept that as their report.
Did you ever read it?
Yes, I imagine I have, yes.
Well,
I did.
my question is, do you remember having read it?
That wasn't the question, but go ahead.
No, my question is, do you remember having read it?
I have read it, yes.
Okay. And when did you read it?
I read it when it came.
Okay. And the date of the evaluation on the first page says July 13th, 2009. And is it your testimony then it would have been in July of 2009?
I don't recall the date.
And besides yourself, who else had access to this report?
I believe Monsignor Baumgartner would have access to it.
And you gave permission for Baumgartner to have had access to this because he was the Vicar General and helping you handle this matter. Is that correct?
Yes. That's my recollection.
You had testified, I think earlier suggested that you thought that the report found that there was no cause for concern or risk of harm to others. Is that your belief that the finding is reflected that?
Objection insofar as it misstates the witness's testimony.
My recollection is that that's the report did not raise any substantial concern for him, and it did not recommend that he not be in ministry.
Do you remember what it did recommend?
There's an aftercare program usually associated with a report, so there would be an aftercare program, and I would say that.
And do you remember that it recommended a program that he did not comply with? Do you remember that?
I do not remember that.
Do you remember that it raised questions about his mental state?
I do not remember the specifics now, no, sitting here.
You do remember that they felt, it's your testimony, that he was fit to return to ministry?
My recollection is that there was nothing substantial preventing him from ministry, and there was no recommendation that he not be in ministry.
Well, there was a recommendation that he go to inpatient treatment and continue inpatient treatment, wasn't there?
He was there for 30 days, I believe, and that was the extent of him being in treatment.
Do you not recall that the evaluators recommended he have an extended inpatient stay there?
I do not remember.
Do you recall that the evaluators also had concerns about his attraction, his sexual attraction, and a risk?
I do not remember that.
And you returned him to ministry on his return to from St. John Vianney, did you not?
Yes,
And placed him in a parish, did you not?
correct.
And you placed him in that parish without restriction, correct?
Correct. We would look to his aftercare, that he should follow that.
And did you ever communicate with anybody about whether he followed through on aftercare?
I don't recall that.
Did you ever receive any report from anybody about his aftercare, if he did?
I don't recall that. I visit with each priest myself each year, and so I would follow up that way also.
So after you sent him to St. John Vianney and you got the report, you returned him to ministry and he continued in ministry unrestricted and unmonitored by you until we sued the diocese, correct?
No.
What's incorrect about that?
He continued in ministry. There was no concerns raised about his ministry. I visited with him, as I do with all the priests, about their ministry, and there was nothing raised, a concern raised about his ministry.
And at the time you returned him to ministry, after the report that you got about a psychological assessment from St. John Vianney, you never asked him, as you recall, about if he had ever committed any sexual offenses against anybody, correct?
Objection asked and answered.
Is that correct?
I don't remember specifically asking Father or talking to Father about that.
Let's look at the Exhibit 9, the report that you did get, on which you relied in returning him to ministry unrestricted. You'll see that the first page is Bates stamped at the bottom right-hand corner, 254. Do you see that number?
25.
Sullivan,
Yeah.
000254. We
Correct.
call that Bates stamp.
Okay.
Okay. Under reason for assessment, you told us the reasons you thought you had sent him there, and the reasons I think you gave were, as you recall it, he needed rest, he had a difficult assignment, and he was depressed. Under the document, Exhibit 9, the reasons they state for assessment are as follows. Father Patrick Sullivan, a Roman Catholic priest from the Diocese of Crookston, Minnesota, was referred for psychological evaluation to assist in treatment planning. Father Sullivan initiated treatment on his own. Do you remember him initiating it on his own? Or you initiating it because of the allegation that had been made?
I remember initiating it, not necessarily, not on the allegations that were made. We covered that.
Okay. But do you remember him initiating this assessment on his own?
No.
Okay. And it goes on to state, as he desires to improve his mental state prior to beginning a new assignment next month. Let's turn to the second page of this as Bates stamp 255. And at the bottom of it, the last full paragraph, I'm going to read a portion of that, then ask you a question. First, I'll direct your attention to the 9th sentence from the bottom of the first full paragraph, and it starts with, he never let that person know of the attraction. Do you see that sentence?
Yes.
I'm going to go up above that. And in the middle of this paragraph, just read something here and then ask you a question. It says, he consumed alcohol casually, but reflects a seminary function when he drank too much. During his first year of seminary, Father Sullivan was infatuated with a classmate, which he repressed. He was conflicted, as that was the first time he had ever been attracted to another male. All of his previous attractions had been to females. So do you remember having read that portion of his assessment?
I don't remember reading that, but I certainly did. I read the assessment.
It then goes on to state, he dealt with this attraction through prayer, and he was concerned that he did not want to make the other seminarians uncomfortable. Period. He never let that person know of the attraction. In the subsequent seminary years, he did engage in mutual masturbation on approximately 4 occasions with other males, which led to thinking more about his sexual identity. When you read that, do you recall reading that?
I don't recall reading it, but it's there.
Did you ever ask him about this?
No.
It then goes on to state, by late winter of 1982, Father Sullivan was troubled following one of these sexual encounters, and having already been ordained a deacon, he was concerned about the implications of his impending entrance into priesthood. He spoke with the bishop and requested a delay. Did you try to get to the bottom of what had happened back then and why he delayed or requested a delay into the priesthood?
No, we did not. He seemed to resolve these issues.
Well, there had been an accusation made against him recently. Wouldn't that indicate that he may not have resolved these sexual issues?
Objection calls for speculation.
You can answer.
I didn't,
lack of foundation also. Go ahead.
as I read through the whole report and all that they're saying, I did not find anything in his present situation which would preclude him from good and safe and effective priestly ministry.
But you didn't ask him.
I did not find anything myself.
Well, you did not ask him, did you?
Objection asked and answered.
Correct?
No.
And who did you ask?
I read the report, and in its entirety, there was nothing to me that precluded him from good and effective priestly ministry that he had been giving.
So you relied upon the report and the professionals that made the assessment?
And the experience of his priestly ministry.
Well, you had him as a priest in the diocese now for 2 years. So what experience had you had with him?
But in the years before I came, he was in ministry. So all of that experience, and he was a priest in good ministry.
So you relied upon 2 things then. The fact that he'd been a priest for as many years as he had, right? Number 1.
The years of priesthood that he had, there was no indication of a danger or in the experience before I came that I knew of and after I came.
And he also relied upon the assessment by the professionals at St. John Vianney Center, correct?
I read the assessment, yes.
And then put him in ministry on that. Let's look at that assessment then. And let's turn to page 250, the last page of it. And that would be Bates stamp 262, Bishop. It states, in light of the assessment results, the following recommendations are offered. Point 1, Father Sullivan should participate in programming designed to increase his understanding of the boundaries of appropriate behavior. Did he participate in that?
We have the ongoing education, yes, that he participated in each year.
He did not follow that program, did he?
He participated in the ongoing safe environment education that we have every year.
He goes on to state, he identifies this as an area of need which, coupled with testing results, strongly indicates boundary education should be addressed immediately. What boundary education was addressed by you as the bishop in reliance of this report?
Father Pat participated in our ongoing safe environment education.
That's provided to all the priests,
Correct?
not specific to him or the recommendation made by the evaluators, is it?
It's his involvement each and every year, yes.
Were you aware, Bishop, that Sullivan didn't want to cooperate with these people and refused to cooperate and left and did not follow the recommendations they gave?
No.
Objection.
Is that news to you?
Objection. Misstates testimony. Evidence not in the record.
Were you aware that he did not follow the recommendations made to you by them?
No.
Goes on to state, his view on this topic is naive, as he would face serious consequences were he to touch a child or adult inappropriately. It appears that without boundary education, both Father Sullivan and those with whom he interacts may be at risk. Do you remember reading that?
I read the report, yes.
Risk? Do you remember reading that?
Objection. Asked and answered.
I remember reading the report.
Do you remember seeing the word risk? He is at risk.
Objection. Asked and answered.
Do you
I
remember
read
that?
the report.
Bishop, do you remember reading that Sullivan is at risk according to the professionals that tested and evaluated him?
Objection. Asked and answered.
An argumentative, counsel.
No, it's not.
I read the report.
You don't remember reading the rest, do you?
I
Misstates the witness's testimony.
Same objection.
Then why don't you answer it?
Argumentative, counsel, please.
read the report.
Do you remember seeing that he was at risk based on the testing and the assessment done at at your request by the professionals where you sent him 4 weeks?
Objection. Asked and
That
answered.
he was at risk. Do you remember that or not?
Same objection.
Yes or no?
I read the report.
Excuse me. The report speaks for itself. This witness has answered that question numerous times. Counsel, can we please move on?
No. No. We have a risk here. It's written. It's at your request. You answer the question. You can't evade the question by simply saying you read the report. The question is, do you remember it or not? If you don't remember it, you say I don't. If you do, you say I do.
Counsel,
It's
please,
one or the other.
this is argumentative. Please just ask a question that you have not asked before.
It's a question that requires an answer.
I'm going to instruct this witness not to answer. We've been over this now many times. Please move on.
So when you put him in the ministry, you considered him not to be a risk?
That question has also been asked at least 3 times already.
Yes. I considered him not to be at risk.
And this report was not in your mind? Or it was in your mind? Which was it?
All things considered, I did not see him to be at risk. When you read the report in its entirety, they did not recommend that he not be in ministry. I did assign him then to priesthood ministry, and there were no concerns raised.
So you read the report, you saw that he was at risk, and you put him in ministry. You took a gamble, didn't you?
Objection is the form. Asked and answered.
You took the risk, didn't you?
In argumentative.
You can answer.
You don't have to answer that, witness, or Bishop. You don't have to answer that. That's an argument of comment. It's not a question.
Did you discuss that report and the language in it that he was at risk with anybody else?
I remember, I believe I talked about the report with Father Baumgartner. Again, in some substance, it's not recommending that he not be in ministry.
Well, they didn't say that in the report. That's your decision to make, and they didn't say it in the report, correct?
In substance, as I read the whole report, it did not say he should not be in ministry.
That was your interpretation. They did not say that in the report. You read it, correct?
Objection has to be answered.
As I read the report, in substance, they did not say he should not be in ministry. Read the report. It does not say he should not be in ministry.
Look at the report, Bishop. Tell us where that says that.
In substance,
No, tell us, I've read the report, you look at the report, point to that where it says he should not be in ministry.
Objection argumentative.
You're misstating the witness's testimony. Counsel, he indicates that the report does not say that Father Sullivan should not be in ministry. It's a double negative. There's nothing in the report that says he should not be in ministry.
Where does that, are you suggesting, Bishop, that that report suggests to you, as the bishop that's evaluating this priest and in charge of him, that he should be in ministry?
I am saying that the report does not say he should not be in ministry.
Are you then saying, a priori, that the report is suggesting he should be?
What I'm saying is that the report does not say he should not be in ministry.
That is a double negative. Are you saying then the report suggests that he should be in ministry?
The report, to me as a bishop, does not indicate that he should not be in ministry.
Bishop, are you saying the report is suggesting to you that he should be in ministry and that he was fit to be in ministry?
Yes.
Are you saying the report then says that he is not a risk?
In substance, the report does not say he should not be in ministry.
The report says he is a risk, doesn't it?
The report speaks for itself, Counsel.
The report says what it says.
It says it appears without boundary education, both Father Sullivan and those with whom he interacts may be at risk, correct?
That's what you just read, yes.
That's in the report, upon which you rely, correct?
Maybe. Yes.
Did you ever call Dr. Coop, the psychologist, that's James Coop, C-O-U-P-E, the psychologist who prepared this report along with the team identified in this, that did the testing and the assessment?
I believe I spoke with them. I don't remember the names, but I believe I did speak with them, yes.
And did you ask him about the risks that they identified?
To my recollection, I asked them about ministry and being put into ministry, yes.
And what did they say?
I don't remember them saying that he was not fit for ministry.
What did they say? You just told us what they didn't say. What did they say?
I don't remember exactly.
You don't even remember asking, do you?
You know, I don't remember specifically speaking with them, so I'll adjust that.
Okay.
Now that you ask that. I don't remember speaking
enough.
specifically with this group.
Thank you, Bishop. I'm going to show you another exhibit. This is,
That's yours, sir.
oh. I'm going to show you another exhibit. This would be Exhibit 16. We've marked it. It's Bates stamp 225 in the first page. This would be the psychiatric discharge summary of St. John Vianney Center. The date of this admission says 7/5/2009, and the date of discharge is 8/7/2009. Did you read this, Bishop?
Yes,
Do you remember reading it?
as I sit here today, I don't, but I remember reading it. Yes, I guess I do.
Do you remember what it told you about what you should do with this priest and his fitness to return?
Specifically, no.
Do you remember what recommendations they made to you about what should be done by you to make sure he wasn't a risk to others?
Sitting here today, no.
Okay, let's look at it. Let's turn to the second page, Bates stamp 226. The second to the last paragraph at the bottom, it states in the first sentence, 2 years ago, the diocese had recommended to Father that he leave the assignment. What do you remember about that? And what do you know about that?
I don't recall anything about that.
It states he took that as an insult, fought the recommendation, and eventually prevailed. So do you remember discerning that Sullivan had a history of having been defiant to recommendations made by superiors or others?
Objection argumentative.
Your answer is you do not?
No.
Let's go to the third page. Bates stamp 227. It states, Father reported misgivings about being at St. John Vianney Center because it was a hospital. He was expecting a retreat atmosphere with mental health consultations available. So, do you remember him being unhappy about being there?
Yes, I think I do.
Okay. What did he tell you about that? Well, what do you remember about that?
I remember just as it says there, that he was unhappy to be there. As I said, I'd sent him there for some rest and an evaluation, and he was not familiar with the place, so that's my recollection.
So, did you have any ongoing conversations? You had authorization for release of medical records, so you could have called his evaluators and or treaters at the psychiatric facility. Did you call any of them or ask them to call you?
I don't recollect that.
Okay. Let's turn to the page, Bates stamp 230. That would be about 5 pages ahead. Lower right-hand corner, 230. In the first paragraph, it states, in his assessment sessions and in his behavior in the milieu, Father quickly demonstrated his difficulty with boundaries. Do you remember reading that?
No.
It states he touched staff and residents repeatedly without asking, even beginning to give residents shoulder and back massages without apparent appreciation of what this might mean to them. Do you remember reading that?
No.
When you read that today, doesn't it alarm you?
Yes, somewhat.
Next paragraph, in the middle of it, I'm going to read a part. It starts where it says, he characterized. You see that line? Next paragraph down.
230?
It starts with, when difficulties were pointed out to him, he was frequently defensive and he consistently tended to minimize problems. First, did you know that he was frequently defensive and minimized problems?
No.
For example, it states, while he had clearly been dysthymic for years and perhaps had some episodes of major depression, he preferred to think of himself as someone who had a seasonal affective disorder, period. Did you know that that's the way he saw himself?
I don't recall that, no.
It goes on to state, he characterized his coming to St. John Vianney Center as a time for rest and refreshment of his spirit, rather than as a result of some interpersonal problems he may have had. He minimized boundary problems as simply as his way of relating with others. When you read that, does that cause you alarm?
I recognize what it says.
Does it cause you alarm?
Not alarm, but concern, maybe.
Well, then why didn't it cause you concern enough or alarm enough to then go ahead and just put them back in a parish without restriction or monitoring?
Objection was to form.
Then?
In total, these were things for him to be aware of and to work on, and he would do that and was made aware of them and was put back in ministry.
Well, so far, we've covered in this report and in this discharge that he was engaged in boundary violations, he was denying, and he was minimizing, right?
The report is what the report says.
Well, it says all those three things, among other things, doesn't it, Bishop?
We heard these, we looked at these, and we would watch these, and he went back to ministry. His diocesan contact person supported this recommendation, and he listened, pointed to the areas of disagreement, so on.
Let's see what else they recommend and find. The last paragraph, they state, at the conclusion of his assessments, Father Sullivan, his treatment team, and his diocesan contact person had a conference to discuss the findings. Who is that diocesan contact person?
I don't remember if it was myself or Father Baumgartner.
Do you know if any notes were made by that contact person, yourself, or whomever it was?
I don't recall.
It goes on to state, because of his problems with emotional awareness, professional and personal boundaries, depression and isolation, and impulsivity, his treatment team recommended a period of residential treatment as the first phase of treatment. His diocesan contact person supported this recommendation. Did I read that correctly?
That's what it says,
And did you read that when this was received by you?
to the best of my recollection.
And he did not follow this recommendation made by the assessor, by his treatment team, and the diocesan contact person, whoever that was, did he?
Did who? Did Father?
Yeah, Sullivan didn't follow that.
No, he went back to ministry and there were no reports of difficulties after that, after he was made aware of these things.
He did not follow the recommendation for residential treatment.
Objection
Did
is
he?
answered.
He went back into ministry and there was no further reports of difficulties.
Bishop, you knew he did not follow the recommendation, didn't you?
Objection, argumentative.
He went back to ministry, was put back in ministry.
Bishop, listen to the question, okay? Look at me, okay? When you placed Father Sullivan in ministry after having received this report and this summary by the professionals, you knew he had not followed and had in fact defied the recommendation made by these professionals to you, correct?
Objection, last answer.
He was put back in ministry, and there were no further reports that I remember of him not following these recommendations.
Did you check?
He was in ministry, and I continued to be his bishop and to work with him, and yes, watch him, and there were no further complaints of these difficulties.
How did you watch him?
Well, I watched him by visiting with him and listening to the folks of the parish. There were no letters that I remember.
You didn't put him on monitoring, did you?
Not to my recollection.
You didn't assign him a supervisor to check in with him weekly, monthly, or daily, did you?
I don't remember.
Why do you think the treatment team, the psychiatrists and psychologists assessing him, and even the contact person from the diocese that was a part of this meeting made such a recommendation if it wasn't needed and there wasn't a risk?
Objection, this witness lacks foundation to answer that question.
Also calls for speculation.
What's the question?
Why do you think they recommended inpatient residential treatment?
That's what they were doing their job.
But he didn't go to it, did he? He didn't go to inpatient treatment.
As I said, he was returned to ministry, and there were no further concerns expressed as we watched the situation.
He returned to ministry by you because that's what he wanted, and he asked you to do, correct?
Objection, argumentative.
I can't answer what he was wanting.
Well, who made the decision to put him in there?
That's my decision.
And he requested he be sent back into ministry of you,
He wanted to go back to ministry, yes, certainly.
and you complied with his request,
I
correct?
gathered all this, and in my estimation, there was nothing to prevent him from being put back in ministry, and I put him back in ministry, and there were no subsequent concerns expressed in his ministry. He did good ministry and continues to do good ministry.
Well, wouldn't a risk, you think he continues to do good ministry, huh?
I do.
Yeah. So, you think he wasn't a risk at the time they made this recommendation?
All things,
Question as to vague.
Yep,
Also
you
asked
can
and
answer.
answered.
when I read the summaries, the reports, and it was my estimation that there was nothing substantial to prevent him from being back in ministry, and I put him back in ministry, and there were no subsequent reports of misconduct.
Let's see what he did actually request, contrary to what they recommended and that you followed. The last sentence, it says, consequently, pursuant to his requests, he was discharged from residential assessment to a program of outpatient treatment that included recommendations for psychotherapy, psychiatric consultations, as indicated for dysthymia and attention concentration problems, spiritual direction, use of support persons, and ministry as assigned by his bishop. Those are all things requested by him according to this, correct?
That's what it says.
Yes. And he made, and you complied with his request to put him back in ministry, correct?
Objection asked and answered.
He wanted to go back to ministry. I did put him back in ministry.
And so what was done by you to make sure that he complied with any of these conditions upon his return to ministry.
Objection mischaracterizes the information in the report when you use the term conditions. Go ahead.
He was put back in
Well,
ministry.
let's rephrase it then. What was done by you to assure that he followed the recommendations that are made that he requested as a part of his return to ministry by you?
I don't remember.
So they recommend psychotherapy. You don't know if he went to psychotherapy, do you?
I don't remember.
You never got his records, did you? If he did.
I don't remember right now.
And you never did any follow through on whether he did comply with that provision, did you?
I followed through on whether he was giving good and adequate ministry, yes.
Well, you didn't follow through on seeing whether he was in psychotherapy, because you don't even know if he...
I don't remember.
Well, you don't know that he was in psychotherapy, do you?
I don't remember.
And mischaracterizes the witness testimony, but go ahead.
And it also says, it recommends, at his request, instead of inpatient treatment, he requests, in addition to psychotherapy, psychiatric consultations, as indicated for his problems. What do you know about the psychiatric consultations that were recommended at his request?
I don't remember.
You don't know anything about it, do you?
I don't remember sitting here today.
Because you didn't ask, did you? You didn't ask him, or you didn't ask his therapist, did you?
I don't remember sitting here today.
Was he assigned support persons as he requested in these recommendations?
I don't remember sitting here today.
You do remember just putting them back in because you thought there wasn't a risk, is that it?
Objection mischaracterizes the testimony, asked and answered.
Or is it because you knew there was a risk and you chose to take it?
Objection argumentative. Bishop, you don't have to answer that question.
Does reading this report with us today and looking at both the findings that they made and the recommendations they made and his non-compliance with that, and you putting him in ministry, now reading this and reviewing this with us, cause you alarm today?
Alarm's not the word.
Aren't you concerned about the safety of the kids out there? You've got that guy out there. You've got that guy in ministry. You've got this report, and I'm not even going to review this with you. It's making me sick. I'm taking a break.
Getting off record at 12:18 p.m. Okay, we are back on the record at 12:28 p.m.
All right. First, I want to begin by offering on the record an apology to you, Bishop, and to council for raising my voice in anger. I do not like that I get angry and express to anybody words in anger. I've never spoken in anger and not regretted it, and I regret having spoken in anger.
Thank you.
So I do apologize.
Thank you.
I am prepared, however, to continue because I don't have many more questions for purposes of the limited purpose of today, okay?
Okay.
And so I'm going to try to conclude. And you have before you Exhibits 9, which is the report of the psychological assessment that we've covered. And you have, which is dated July 13, 2009. And you have before you Exhibit 16, which is the psychiatric discharge summary dated August 7th, 2009, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now I'm going to direct your attention to Exhibit 11, and that would be the exhibit I showed you earlier, and this is a memorandum dated September 15th, 2009. Now this is the memorandum from Monsignor Baumgartner, correct?
Correct.
And this is the memorandum in the file of Sullivan in which Baumgartner has made the report to you and followed up on the investigation of the allegation of sexual abuse by Father Sullivan of a minor, correct?
Yes, I believe that's right.
And so this is about 1 to 2 months after Sullivan is discharged with recommendations and the findings that we just reviewed in Exhibits 9 and 16, correct?
Correct.
And this is after now, you have now placed Sullivan in a parish without restriction to minister to the faithful, without letting anybody know outside your office about the findings at St. John Vianney, correct?
Father Pat is back in ministry, yes.
Okay. And you had not told anybody about what they had found or what they had recommended, correct?
That's correct, according to my recollection, yes.
Okay. So let's look at Exhibit 11 then, September 15, 2009. This is where Father Jerry Rogers talked to me in person. He received 3 phone calls from a 17-year-old young man who identified himself as, it's blanked out, but I think it was what it was. And then he recites for you in your eyes what he had been told. Is that correct?
Correct here.
And then you'll see 1/3 of the page down, it is recorded, I informed Bishop Hoeppner of the accusation. And we already covered that, correct?
Correct.
And so when you said to me earlier that that accusation had been made before you sent him to treatment and assessment, you were mistaken, weren't you?
According to these dates, this was September, and we have July and August, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
So that was simply a mistake.
I believe so.
Okay.
And the September one you gave me here notes the allegation is unsubstantiated, huh? The final page.
At the time you received this memorandum in September of 2009, 1.5 months after he is discharged with findings of boundary violations, impulse control problems, recommendations for inpatient residential treatment, none of which he followed, and then discharged with other recommendations, none of which there is evidence he followed. You now get a report that in fact he of a risk in which he is accused of having abused a kid who is 17 years old, correct?
Objection compound.
My recollection is that this is an unsubstantiated report that we looked into, as we take all reports seriously.
At the time you first received it, did you consider it unsubstantiated?
It's something we would have to look into.
And did you use any professionals to look into it?
I don't recall.
Anybody trained in discerning what credible accusations of sexual abuse are or would look like?
The Diocese of Crookston, the Vicar General is charged with looking into these matters.
So the only one that really looked into it that led you to make the determination was unsubstantiated was Monsignor Baumgartner?
Objection, this states his testimony.
It also mischaracterizes the report.
So upon whom did you rely in making the determination that it was unsubstantiated?
I relied on this report that says so, and talking with Father Baumgartner, to my recollection.
When you got the report as outlined by Monsignor Baumgartner that a youth had now accused of Father Sullivan of sexual abuse of him while having been at the parish in Red Lake, a crime, did you report that directly to law enforcement? Yes or no?
When I received from Father Baumgartner, I informed Bishop Hoeppner of the accusation. He was charged with reporting that. The Vicar General reports these, and so it was taken care of to be reported on behalf of the diocese by Father Baumgartner.
And so did you instruct Baumgartner then, when he reported, to make sure that law enforcement who received the report also got the same evidence that you had and the same documents in your possession that included the same recommendations that this guy was a risk, who had boundary violations, impulse control problems, had been required to go to inpatient treatment, which he refused, and did you let me withdraw that question. Did you instruct Baumgartner to give these reports, Exhibits 9 and 16, to the police?
Not to my recollection.
In fact, the diocese withheld it from the police, didn't they?
Objection as to the
I
characterization.
just answered. I don't recall instructing Father Baumgartner to give them that material.
The diocese has never been told about these, the police have never been told about these reports that I just reviewed with you, Exhibit 9 and 11, or 9 and 16, have they?
Objection as to foundation.
That's for speculation.
What's your knowledge? Have law enforcement ever seen Exhibit 9 or 16?
Not to my knowledge.
And when you returned Sullivan to ministry, did you ever tell anybody in the parish, either today or in the past months, as you've been reporting that this guy was falsely accused and he's celebrating his innocence and allowing to be in ministry, that he has a history of boundary violations and he was refused to go to treatment as recommended by professionals? You ever tell anybody that?
Objection as to form.
What was the question?
Did you ever tell the people about the risk that was discerned by the professionals?
We take all things into consideration. We make a determination to put the man back into ministry. That's what was done.
Let me have Exhibit 13. There was a review board process that you went through with him before he was reinstated, wasn't there?
We're talking about recently now, huh?
Yes.
So
After we sued, you pulled him out.
recently.
Yes.
Correct. We have a review board. Again, I mentioned we certainly comply, and every year we're found compliant with the Charter for the Protection of Children and the norms. We have a wonderful review board. There are 2 police officers, an assistant police chief and a sheriff. There are 2 social workers. There's an attorney in charge,
You picked the review board, didn't you?
In charge of family services, attorney, and a priest on the review board. I appoint them to the review board. Monsignor Foltz, the current Vicar General, and the Vicar General is charged with working with the review board, yes.
Yeah. The question is,
Wonderful review.
you picked a review board, didn't you?
I assigned people to the review board.
You picked them.
I signed them. Father Foltz worked to assemble them, and I signed them.
And you removed Sullivan after we sued the diocese because he was in ministry, didn't you?
Pardon?
You removed Sullivan from ministry after we sued you in the diocese.
When an accusation is made, we do a preliminary investigation, which takes the person out of ministry while that's ongoing.
It's because we sued you, right?
Because an formal allegation with an accuser came forward, and so we took him out of ministry while that's investigated, yes.
That same accuser had come forward in 2009.
That same accuser?
Yes.
Objection, this states the evidence.
I'm not sure that that's the same accuser. I'm aware that this accuser came forward now, and so, as I said, we took the person, Father Pat, out of ministry while this was investigated.
So it's correct to say that you had not told anybody in the public about what you knew about Sullivan's history, either in treatment or the accusation that had been made, until the lawsuit was brought by our office against you and the diocese and made public, correct?
When
Is that correct?
your office came forward, we made that known, and we removed Father Sullivan from ministry while this was being investigated.
And you had made nothing known about Sullivan's history, both in treatment or assessment, or the earlier accusations, before we sued you and the diocese, correct?
Objection, mischaracterization of previous testimony.
When this accusation
correct or
came
not,
forward,
Bishop?
Before then, no.
Okay, thank you. I'm showing you Exhibit 13. This is a statement you made responsive to the filing of the suit, is it not?
Yes, it appears to be.
And it's a statement that you made after you made the decision to return him to ministry because you claimed, based on your process, that the allegations were unsubstantiated, right?
Well, just to be clear, the document is indicated as a title statement of the Diocese of Crookston. So it's a statement of the Diocese of Crookston.
Well, you're the bishop, but you approved the statement, didn't you?
I did.
Okay. So it states the plaintiff was deposed by diocesan attorneys, the Diocese of Crookston Board of Review for the Protection of Children and Young People reviewed the deposition of the plaintiff and deemed the allegation not credible. So when you tell the people and the public about the reason for the reinstatement of Sullivan to ministry, it's also correct, is it not, that when you return him to ministry, you return him to ministry at this time without restriction,
Correct.
without monitoring.
We monitor, we watch, yes, so.
Without any special
Without
monitoring.
restrictions, without special monitoring, yes.
Without any special supervision. He's just
Correct.
out there,
Correct.
right? Okay. And when you had this submitted to your review board, were they given Exhibits 9 and 16, the review and the assessment and psychiatric findings of St. John Vianney?
Father Foltz is in charge of work with the review board. I don't know off the top of my head what information he gave them. They reviewed for their review.
You don't know, do you?
Father Foltz is in charge, and he worked with them.
You're the one that's making the decisions. You're the one that made the decision to put him in ministry and to tell the people that he was effectively safe, weren't you?
Objection argumentative.
As it states in the statement, the review board recommended after reviewing the situation that he be put back in ministry.
You don't know if they reviewed these exhibits, do you? You don't know that.
Father Foltz is in charge of that.
Been asked and answered, counsel.
Anything else? That's it. Thank you.
review in silence.
We are going off the record at 12:44 PM.
That there'll be a continuation of the deposition for reasons already stated. It'll be done down in our offices as opposed to having us come back up here. And not that we don't enjoy the town, it's just...
It's great fishing.
Thank you.